They showed up at dawn with a flatbed truck, an excavator like it belonged at a movie set, and a set of papers so glossy they caught the light and made everything else look ordinary, as if that shine could make the rest true. I watched the machine's arm hover over the fence my grandfather built. And for a second I thought about how many winters my wife had painted those posts. How many summers my kids had climbed them, and then the operator revved it like it was a sports car, and someone in a suit smiled and said, "We have the authority." That was the moment I learned how fast something small and quiet becomes a story you don't want to tell. My name's Gus Callahan. I didn't want a story. I wanted my coffee. My mail. The small bit of land that had been called Redwood Hollow since before the county map even had a name for it. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a vineyard. It was a patch of earth where my grandfather planted a maple so crooked it leaned like it knew the hill's secrets, and when people asked what I did, I'd shrug and say, "I take care of it." That morning, with diesel in the air and legal-looking paper between two women's manicured fingers, "Take care of it" suddenly sounded like a career choice that came with court dates and headlines. They called themselves a homeowners association enforcement team, and that should have been a dull phrase, something you nod through at a community meeting. But when a suit says he has a demolition order and a man with a crowbar gets off a truck, it stops being a meeting and starts feeling like a heist. I read the paper through a magnifying glass after they left, because they did leave. Politely. As if leaving was part of the plan, and the signature looked like someone had traced an old county clerk's name over a coffee stain. It was polite fraud. It was a bully in a suit. It was the smell of diesel pretending to be official. You don't prepare for that. You prepare for winters and taxes and the kid who borrows your tractor. Not for men with smiles who think parchment and paint make lies legal. So you do the little things you can control. I went into the house, locked the door, pulled the old deed from the trunk of my truck where it sat under a tarp and a box of spare bolts, and called Samir Deputy Delgado because he was the kind of cop who had once pulled me out of a ditch and then offered a hand and a thermos of coffee and didn't ask for a medal. Samir showed up with slow eyes and an easy way of making you think the world might still be reasonable. But even he squinted at the document and said, "Gus, that looks off." That's when the idea of a larger fight slid into the edges of the morning, like weather creeping over a ridge. The first act of our story is simple. A person is told his life is no longer his. He refuses. And he discovers that the people who would take that life have rehearsed how to smile while they do it. But there's a deeper beat here, the difference between ownership and belonging. I could have handed over the keys and bought a place that pretended to be peaceful. But that would have been fake. And fake is one of those things that sleeps in your chest and keeps you up at night. Renee Holt came into my life like a lawyer in a paperback. Sharp and a little tired. Because she'd been a jag in a different life and now did defense work for people like me who had more dirt than money. She said things in a way that made them true, not because she convinced you, but because she kept asking the right questions until the world answered. We found holes in the paperwork fast. An overlay map that claimed a strip of my land was common space. A recorded easement with dates that didn't line up. And a contractor's account that had signed off on demolition permits at 3 a.m. Those are detective things, the kind you do when you don't trust the handshake of a tidy man. The deeper move was when a kid named Noah Price called Renee and said, "I think I helped." Noah was in his mid-20s. Voice brittle like someone who swallowed too much guilt. And he worked on the software side for community management. He'd watched directives go out to crews, seen videos someone wanted edited, and then seen overhead maps replaced with fake overlays meant to confuse the county's recorders. When he said the name Miranda Voss, the president of the Willow Ridge Covenant, the HOA that wasn't so much a neighborhood club as a corporate eyebrows-up operation, my stomach did a small, steady flip. People in suits don't always want your lawn. Sometimes they want the thing beneath it. Miranda had reasons. That was part of the sick poetry of the whole thing. She ran for HOA president on a platform of elevating property values. And she had an eyebrow for opportunity. There was an old developer, a man with a president's smile, who'd quietly bought up parcels around the hollow and put them into holding companies. If certain strips of land could be declared common and scooped into a maintenance fund, if redundant owners could be bullied into selling at market-friendly rates, then whole plots of riverfront could be parceled and sold like sheets of paper. That's how greed learns to sound bureaucratic. That's how a handshake turns into a suit with keys. We spent weeks gathering the bones of the case. Renee liked bones. She liked data. She liked the way facts line up like vertebrae and make something that stands. Samir ran camera angles and bodycam tests. I patrolled the fence lines at night. Because anger is not a plan, but vigilance sometimes is. Noah fed us logs, timestamps, and deleted files, and a server trail that smelled like smoke. We found a contractor, Cole Madigan, who'd been hired under a shell company to handle compliance operations. Cole was a man who liked power tools and hands that didn't ask questions. He was small and fierce, and somewhere between a hired hand and a hired conscience. Cole's conscience was thin and folded. There was a moment, about 3 weeks in, when the middle act turned. That's the place in every story where you stop reacting and you start setting traps, not because traps make you heroic, but because people who hurt others rarely think about being watched. We staged cameras. We let our neighbors know to watch Mrs. Hensley moved her bird feeder to get a better view. And young Marcus Bell started recording on his drone like it was a school project with a vendetta. We planted a little bait, a false notice posted on a public bulletin board, a decoy that claimed a different survey would be run, and then we sat back. It was quiet for a time. That's the deceptive part. People who are about to act often make a show of leaving. When they came back, they brought a backhoe. That scene, I keep picturing it because it's a movie in a timbre that doesn't leave you. The sun was low. The sky a hard, honest blue. And the backhoe rolled up like it expected applause. Cole hopped out, gloves on. And Miranda's assistant, a woman named June who always wore lipstick like it was armor, handed out the new authorization. They had men with radios, men who'd practiced intimidation, and a photographer who took pictures of property lines like he was making art. The operator threw the arm forward, and the metal teeth kissed the fence post. That's when Samir, God bless him, stepped out from behind a neighbor's shed with a clipboard and a calm enough voice to make the air stop vibrating. "Sir," he said, "you don't have a valid permit to take that down." Cole laughed. June glared. Miranda smiled like a monarch who had sent a message in the shape of an order. And then something else happened. A battery of deputies arrived. The result of a call we'd placed under a different pretense. The county had a way of moving slowly until the moment it had to move fast. And in that instant it moved. Radios screeched. And the operator's hands fluttered. And the driver who'd been polishing his construction boots suddenly looked. Cole tried to bark orders. Miranda tried to charm everyone into a narrative that made her the victim of intransigent locals. Noah's messages went up on a screen. Samir had somehow contrived to project deleted file names, timestamps, edited video frames. The men who'd come to threaten realized they were in a different kind of theater, and their teeth were not as good as their courage. We made arrests because there were lines and witnesses and a city recorder who hated lies almost as much as Renee liked facts. This was the midpoint. The big set piece. It felt like justice for a moment. The sort of justice you can put a photo on a page and call a victory. But justice here is not a movie where everyone leaves happier. It's a slow, workmanlike thing with appeals and depositions and lawyers who chew your confidence and spit it out. The case moved to court. And the second act, the long, intellectual grind began. Court is a different kind of field work. It's not about the muscle of a backhoe. It's about the grammar of evidence. Renee laid things out for the DA like a surgeon, the forged overlay, the contractor logs, the whistleblower testimony, the recordings of Miranda's private messages where she said things like, "We need those river lots cleared for the purchasers," as if she were arranging flowers instead of livelihoods. Noah took the stand first. Watching him was like watching someone brave a confession. He told the story of code and command, of orders sent and retracted, of a manager who liked the feeling of being in control. He watched the gallery while he spoke. At times his cheeks went wet with memory, and he said, "I thought I was doing a job. I didn't think about what that job would do to people." Miranda's defense was theatrical. She wore a skirt that communicated confidence and a smile that suggested she'd practiced being misunderstood. She painted herself as a steward of the neighborhood, as someone who simply wanted standards. And she pointed to bylaws and minutes in a meeting that had existed on paper and maybe, according to her, in spirit. But Renee had the rope of logic and pulled. The DA had a file of emails that smelt faintly of desperation payments into accounts with vague names. Transfer requests approved in the night. And then we played the raid video in court. There's nothing like watching your own land on a screen. The sound of a backhoe like thunder. Your fence surrendered like something strip-mined. People in the gallery shifted. Someone started whispering "my aunt" and "my sister" like litmus paper for empathy. The fireworks. The real pivot came when Cole caved and made a deal. He spoke about Miranda like someone telling a ghost story. The want. The fervor. The particular cruelty of bureaucracy when it has a destination. He said. She said we'd be handsomely rewarded. She said the county would be grateful. His voice was small in the courtroom, as if the truth had taken the fun out of his hands. The judge, a woman with a face made of years and an appetite for plain words, turned and said, "This behavior is fraud." Plainly and simply. Miranda's face lost a kind of layering then. The polite veneer chipped back to reveal something sharp. She looked at the room like an animal caught in a trap it had designed. We won in the way people win in courts, not with dramatic last-minute evidence, but with a slow assembly of facts. Miranda was found guilty of conspiracy to commit trespass and falsifying public records. The developer's shell companies were ordered to produce contracts. And Cole's sentence was part vindication, part bargain. The county fined the HOA and placed a temporary injunction to stop any transfers. It felt, in that strange way legal victories do, a little like being allowed to breathe after someone said you couldn't, relief dipped in paperwork. But the story didn't end with gavels and headlines. It moved into the place all human stories do, aftercare. There were fines to collect, small comfort, and there were neighbors who'd been shaken awake by the idea that their yards could be spoken for behind closed doors. I started getting calls from people I'd never met, my driveway, my dock. They came from my garden. The thing you realize when you stand on land and fight for it is that land is a language people speak to each other with. It's not just dirt. It's identity. A memoir written in grass. So we did something else. Renee and I put together what we called the Hollow Fund, a small legal aid pool for people who had been bullied by predatory covenants or had paperwork pushed at them like a salve. We held town meetings at the community center, hot coffee and folding chairs and bad fluorescent lights, and people stood up and told their small wrongs in big ways. A woman named Rosa, who lived 3 houses down from me, talked about a tree she'd planted after her husband died and how the HOA had called it nonconforming. A young father said a developer had offered him pocket change for a lake view so he could put up a chain of rental cabins. Each story felt like a coin dropped into a slot, and the slot was our collective memory. On a summer evening, I walked my land with Renee and Samir and Noah. The maple was taller not by much, but it leaned at the same angle. And when the light hit it just so, the leaves looked like they were stitched with gold. Noah held his phone down, recording the sound of the river because that's what he did now. He recorded things to remember them properly. I thought about the cost of stubbornness. I'd lost sleep. I'd spent money. I'd watched friends and family get dragged into testimony and stress. You don't hero your way out of a fight, you pay for it in other ways. But when the sun slid down and the light pooled at our boots, I felt something like peace. The kind that's honest rather than performative. Stories like this one always end with a tangle of endings. Miranda appealed. The case went on in small ways. The developer's holdings were reorganized under trust names no one liked. And a few parcels were sold to people who swore the land would be kept green. Cole did his time and took up work that didn't involve bulldozers and schemes. The Hollow Fund helped 3 families keep their properties without selling out. That's the tidy headline. The messy thing was the conversations at barbecues. The old men who said, "We told you so," with affection. The woman who called me in the middle of a night and asked, "What if they come back?" I had to be honest. Sometimes a fight ends. Sometimes it just pauses. There's a scene I keep turning over, smaller than a backhoe, but more intimate. Miranda, after the verdict, came to the gallery for the public reading of the judgment. I expected anger or defiance or a sermon. Instead, she approached the railing and looked at me like someone trying to read small print without reading glasses. Her voice was quiet, sharpened by everything that had happened. "You made me see," she said. It was a strange thing for a woman who'd orchestrated theft to say. But she said it with the gravity of someone surprised by a truth. I thought I was making things better. You can hear a lot of things when someone confesses without asking forgiveness. You hear the thoroughness of their blindness. I said nothing then because nothing was required. Sometimes silence is a way of letting a person fall into their own conscience. If I had to sum up what happened in one line, it would be this: people will make up laws if it benefits them. And they will dress their lies in process until the process itself looks respectable. The rest of us, the ones who've been handed soil and memory and a crooked maple, have to be the ones who make the records mean something again. That's not a romantic mission statement. It's the work of neighbors who refuse to be quiet. What I'd like you to think about, and this is where I always try to push the listener a little, is how much of your life is controlled by documents you don't read. By associations you never thought had teeth. By men in suits who love the sound of authority. How many of your parents' properties, your childhood swing sets, your grandfather's old boat, are vulnerable to a sentence that sounds reasonable until you try to live under it? I'm not saying the world is a conspiracy. I'm saying the world rewards vigilance and records. That there are small, quiet things we can do keep deeds in the glove box. Record meetings. Demand transparency that make it harder for someone to say your things don't belong to you anymore. I also want you to see the moral fog here. Miranda wasn't a cartoon devil. She was a woman with a column in the local paper who'd convinced herself that a developer's plan was civic improvement. Cole wasn't a monster. He was someone who wanted more than his pay grade let him have. Noah was a kid learning that the architecture of his job had moral consequences. Samir was a deputy who liked old men and thermoses. And Renee was a lawyer who didn't like being lied to. Those are complicated people. And real life mostly lives in those gray corners where motives are mixed. If there's a takeaway that isn't legal advice, because I am not a lawyer, and neither is this recorded confession, it's this: if you own something you love, you owe it the courtesy of knowing its paperwork. You owe your neighbors the courtesy of asking what they mean when they say improvement. You owe your child the courtesy of telling them why that tree matters. There are small acts of stewardship, not dramatic, but consistent. Pay your taxes. Read your HOA minutes. Keep your deeds. And when someone smiles with a paper, ask for proof that the smile knows what the paper really says. At the end of the day, I still walk the ridge. The fence has a fresh post where the backhoe bit it. And the rusted gate my father rigged still squeaks in a way I find familiar and slightly ridiculous. The Hollow Fund has a list of 3 names we help each year. And Marcus teaches neighborhood kids how to fly a drone so they can keep an eye on things. Noah started a community tech collective to help people audit their records. He likes being useful in a way that isn't secret. Renee? Well, Renee keeps taking cases that make her angry because she likes the feeling of filing facts into order. Samir retired 2 years after the trial and took up woodworking, which is what deputies sometimes do when they've had enough of paperwork and need something to hold with both hands. This isn't a fairy tale with a single moral. It's a story about weathering and paperwork and stubbornness and a crooked maple that refused to be moved for anyone's convenience. It's about neighbors who stood up and a lawyer who loved facts, and a deputy who liked thermos coffee. It's about people who tried to turn property into profit without considering the lives that lived on the other side of the deed. So here's what I want from you, because that's how these things keep breathing. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had something in your life taken by procedure? By form? By someone who assumed their process was enough? What would you do if a man in a suit came for the old oak in your yard? Do you think an HOA can be a force for good? Or do you think they are a slow-moving hazard? If you've been through anything like this, share it name changed if you want, because there's a strange power in collective memory. We make better maps when we draw them together. If you like these stories, share this video with a neighbor who might need to hear it. And if you're the kind of person who keeps records in a shoebox, maybe move them to a folder where someone else can find them later. Hit subscribe if you want more of these real life, not too heroic tales. I'll be here on the ridge, drinking coffee, listening for the sound of a backhoe engine that isn't supposed to be here. And I'll tell you the truth the way the light hits the maple, honest, a little crooked, and mostly stubborn.